In this last video, taking a quick look at the sculpt tools within Cinema 4D, we're going to take a look at actually baking out the high resolution detail into one of our lower resolution models. This makes it much more functional and much easier to work with for animation purposes, etc. So let's take a look how we do this. I've got my male bust selected, and you'll see here I've got several layers here controlling different attributes. I could turn these off. That way it gives you a little bit of freedom to work, and you can undo things really easily by keeping a non-destructive workflow using layers. I also have 6 levels of subdivision, and I've got way too many polygons to make this a manageable mesh for animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the Sculpt menu, and I'm going to go to Bake Sculpt Objects. That brings up this panel, and you can see the first page you get to is the Baking tab, and you have the options for the format that you want to export this out as, the color depth information, preset sizes. So here we have an 8K texture locked in, and we can choose, for example, to create a single file. So this would create basically a multi-layered file with all of our different baking channels out. So if I go to Options, we then see Source Object, which is our high-res mesh, level 6, and our target, our low-res mesh. So do we want to go all the way down to level 0? Do we want to go to level 1? And some other options for things that we might want to bake out. So I definitely want to bake out the displacement channel, and I'll also, for this exercise, export a normal and ambient occlusion map. Lastly, under settings, we have the method, and this would be the right method for animations. I'm going to leave this the way it is, RGB XYZ object. And again, you have options for the normal mapping as well. I'm going to accept object for that as well. And then any super sampling for the ambient occlusion, I'm going to leave that at 0 and go back to the baking option and tell it where I want it to save. So there it puts it in, and now all I have to do is click Bake. Now this will take a little bit of time, but shouldn't take particularly long. And one thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is that it's very important that you have a well laid out UV. So before you get to this stage, you really need to have your under mesh, your base mesh already UV unwrapped, and that way when it bakes it out to the UVs, everything will work out good, and it'll be able to put the displacement map acceptably. If not, you're going to have some strange tears and just some bad things happen. So make sure that you check out the UV unwrapping tutorial within Body Paint, and that will ensure that when you go out to bake these textures that you end up with good results. Alright, so when it's done baking, I end up with my ambient occlusion pass, my displacement pass, and my normal map. So all of these are now baked in, and if I look inside the render, here's a quick render of the bust with the low-res geometry, but with these new materials applied inside my channels. So if you look, what it does is it creates a copy of the mesh with the lower subdivision level and the texture tag already applied with the baked materials beneath. So if you look through here, I have my diffusion, and it's loaded my ambient occlusion in there, my normal map, and then lastly my displacement map. And you'll notice that the subpolygon displacement is enabled, and it automatically adjusts the subdivision level to the right amount between my 0 base subdivision, which is what we ended up exporting, and the 6th level of subdivision. So works out really good. And again, a big part of that is having a nice clean UV map. And but that's it for the quick glance at the sculpting tools within Cinema 4D. So hopefully you've gotten a nice overview of how you can add a sculpt tag to any geometry that's editable, use the brushes, masking, and stamp techniques that we looked at to create some really fantastic looking sculpts within Cinema 4D, and then export those high resolution detailed maps into lower resolution models that are easy to deal with.